Welcome back to another episode of the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Ashley Perrien, and my co-host this week, Russell Glasser.
Hi there.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
We are live August 1st and being sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We have weekly meetings every Sunday at Crescent City Beignets on 6th Street, a couple blocks west of Lamar. Those start around 11:30 and go until maybe 1:32 or thereabouts. It's atheists just sitting around, talking, having a good time, talking about the latest happenings in the world. Any atheist-friendly people are more than welcome to come down and meet us. You do not have to be a member of the group or anything like that. So if you have been watching the show and you want to meet somebody, definitely come on down. We'd love to have you there. Other regular things that we do every Thursday, or actually let me back up a second. We have those meetings every Sunday at Crescent City Beignets. The third Sunday of every month, we are at the Austin History Center on 9th and Guadalupe. We have a lecture series there. Who our lecturer will be in August, I'm not positive. I don't have the name. I can't remember exactly what group they are. I think that we have a speaker lined up. Exactly who, I'm not sure. As soon as we find out, we'll let you know. But that's the third Sunday of every month at the Austin History Center at 12:30. Other things that we do, we have Atheist Happy Hour at Antonio's Tex-Mex on the southbound feeder of I-35 just south of 183. That starts at 7:30 and again goes on for a couple of hours. And it's very similar to Sunday meetings, just sitting around talking about the latest and greatest. Again, anybody's more than welcome to come down. The other show that we do, in addition to this one, is The Non-Prophets, which is an internet audio streaming show hosted by atheistnetwork.com. The host on that is Jeff D., co-host Dennis Lubay, and Russell Glasser is the producer. That's every other Saturday at Atheist Network. They just had a show yesterday. Have another one in 2 weeks on the 14th. And I believe that is more or less it. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but I have no clue what that would be. So apparently it's not that important. Anyway, thank you for watching the show. We'll be getting to callers in about a half an hour or so. This is the Atheist Experience, so if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, go ahead and keep an eye out for the phone number, which we'll put up in a little while. First, we're going to go over to Russell Glasser and find out a little more about our country. Yay!
Okay, but before I start, I would like to acknowledge the fact that I got a present today.
Yay!
At least I think it was for me. I just happened to walk in the studio and I noticed that somebody had left me something. There's a little sticky note here with my name on it, Russell Glasser. It was just lying around and I almost didn't see it. But it turned out to be a pamphlet. It says, "Hell yes!"
Or "Hell yes."
Hell yes, which I gather from glancing at the cover means that this person is trying to tell me that there is a hell and is trying to do so through a very long and boring track.
It looks like several articles written or something like that.
Yeah,
Different articles or...
It says press kit, actually,
yes, okay.
And it's by Robert Jeffress, who I never heard of.
Yeah.
But I assume somebody left me this for a reason, if it was for me. So you can go ahead and call and tell me why I should read it. Because
if you did, thank you for the presents.
I have other stuff to do. Okay. Anyway. So, Ashley, I get the feeling sometimes that some people feel a little threatened by our show.
Okay, I'll go for that one.
I suspect this because of the calls that we get occasionally that say, what gives you the right to be on TV talking about atheism?
Yeah, somehow that First Amendment thing just kind of eludes them.
Right. Well, I mean, to say that... It's one thing to call in and say, I think atheists are morons and they're all going to burn in hell.
Of course.
That at least is expressing, a certain opinion, a certain viewpoint, yeah. which we're here to do.
Of course.
We think that's ridiculous.
We don't agree with that viewpoint, but it's a viewpoint.
Yeah, but it's another thing to call in and say, how dare you be on TV and talk about this?
Yeah, yeah.
But I want to be sympathetic to these people. I think that part of where they're coming from is that there may be a little fear in the back of their mind somewhere that one day some jackbooted atheists are gonna burst in through their door and force them at gunpoint to renounce Christianity.
Okay, so you're going to be nice. Is this good cop, bad cop thing? Or?
Well, not exactly. I mean, I think it's important to point out as often as possible that we, or at least I can only speak for myself, but atheists like me have generally a live and let live attitude, which is you have your beliefs, I have mine. I reserve the right to call your beliefs ridiculous, as I just did.
Yeah.
But
they can do the same thing.
You go ahead and have your beliefs. I would never think to say that you can't have those beliefs. No. I think, in fact, that freedom of what you personally believe is one of the most important rights in a free society.
Does that also go back to freedom of expression? You have the right to believe whatever you want.
Sure.
You also agree that people have the right to express
to say what they
things.
want. Yes.
Okay.
Of course, nobody is forcing you to listen.
Of course.
You can change the channel.
Yeah.
But we have a right to be here, and you have a right to believe what you want.
And get your own public access TV show. As
long as it doesn't infringe on other people's rights.
Yeah.
Of course, if somebody does say that, I'm going to believe what I want, but I would like to strong-arm you, Mr. Individual Atheist, or pass laws that say that, the official government position is that you're wrong. I got a problem with that.
Yeah.
Which is why I decided today to talk about yet another subject that I am no authority on whatsoever. But it's one that should be near and dear to the hearts of every member of the Atheist Community of Austin, since that's what we're about. It's separation of church and state. And I'd like to lead into this topic today with a choice quote that was expressed on the Hannity and Combs show a couple weeks ago. Not by Hannity or Combs, but by guest host Mike Gallagher, who asserted that I was going to talk specifically about those who would say that this is a Christian nation and ought to be, and our laws ought to reflect that. So Mike Gallagher, the guest host, asserted that the plank was a simple assertion of numerical fact. If a neighborhood had 82% of the population that was Italian, and a town had 82% of the population that was Polish, we'd call those communities Italian or Polish towns. So why do liberals have such a knee-jerk reaction when anybody dares to suggest that with 82% of the population being Christian, we are, in fact, a Christian nation? Ashley,
okay.
Why is that stupid?
Well, on the face of it, you could almost say it makes sense.
Yeah, in a technical, legalistic sort of way.
If you walk into a neighborhood that is predominantly Italian or something like that,
yes,
you could say that this is an Italian neighborhood.
That's true.
And that's technically, in a form of speaking, that's technically correct.
Right.
If you want to go by numbers, this is a Christian nation. However...
Right, and nobody would ever argue with that,
exactly.
I think.
However, Christians don't like to stop at that. They don't like to say, we're the majority, aren't we nice?
Yeah.
They want to say, we're the majority, therefore you will do things our way, damn it.
When a Christian says that this is a Christian nation, they're not saying, hey, this is a nation where lots of people happen to be Christian.
End of story. They don't stop there.
Because if they just said that would be cool with me.
Yeah.
But what they do is say, well, since this is a Christian nation, it's just peachy if we pass laws that enforce the fact that this is a Christian nation. So, students should all pray in school, and our particular religion should dictate how issues like marriage are resolved and things like that. Yeah. It's silly to say that it's technically true that this is a Christian nation, because by the same logic, this is also a white nation.
Yeah. White female nation, actually.
A white female nation, yes. Again, technically true, but if somebody were to start passing Jim Crow laws again, saying, only white people have certain rights as far as representation is concerned, I think we'd have a little problem with that. If the Italian or Polish neighborhoods that this guy was talking about said, okay, new rule, only Italians and Polish people can live here.
Yeah.
Then the claim that this is an Italian or Polish neighborhood becomes a little bit more subjective than it was.
Yeah.
So that's ridiculous. There's nothing I like better than going around the internet and finding a bunch of conventional wisdom that certain people hold and busting them wide open. So that's what I'm here for today.
Yay!
So I brought sort of a hodgepodge of claims made by the Christian Nation crowd, and I'm just going to go through a few of them. Of course, most of us are familiar with the phrase separation of church and state, which generally enters into any discussion of religion and government.
Yeah.
Of course, Christians who favor this Christian Nation argument love to point out that the words separation of church and state are not in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Oh my God! And they'll be all clever, like, well, where in the Constitution does it say separation of church and state?
Yeah.
Can you point to a specific part?
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of things are in the Constitution, like right to privacy and separation of powers, things that are taken for granted because that's what the courts have determined over the years that the Constitution means. That's why we have courts, and that's the role of the courts as expressly defined in the Constitution. A lot of people on the Christian Nation issue will have claimed that the phrase separation of church and state was invented in 1947 by the ACLU, who wrote something for the Supreme Court in the case of Everson versus the Board of Education. Just to go back to that case, Justice Hugo Black wrote, neither a state nor the federal government can openly or secretly participate in the affairs of any religious organizations or groups, and vice versa. In the words of Jefferson, the clause against establishment of religion by law was intended to erect, quote, a wall of separation between church and state. Now, I've heard some preachers actually claim that the ACLU made up the phrase separation of between church and state themselves and then fed it in their brief to Justice Black, who copied it verbatim. And they say this even though it says right there in the ruling that Jefferson said it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, didn't they quote it as Jefferson saying it?
Yeah. I'm not saying everybody does this, but
course.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
So stop it.
Well, do we have evidence that Jefferson said this?
Yes, actually, we do. The source of this, shortly after Thomas Jefferson was elected president, some Baptist from Connecticut asked that he declare a national day of fasting in order to help the country recover from a bitterly fought presidential campaign. Thomas Jefferson disagreed. He felt that the federal government should not recognize a day set aside for any religious reason, and in his reply, which was written January 1st, 1802, he stated, being with you, and this is something that all atheists probably know practically by heart, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with solemn reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that is in the Constitution, kids. Thus building a wall of separation between church and state. You know, it's lucky that our founding fathers actually wrote things that explained what they were thinking, so that we don't have to guess the way that people do with the Bible, which doesn't have a lot of surrounding
supporting
text.
documents.
You know, when there's something weird in the Bible, all you have to go on is the Bible, mostly. But then I hear another comeback from the people who are aware that Jefferson said that. And what they say is, well, Thomas Jefferson doesn't know anything about the Constitution. He was in France at the time it was written. He was an ambassador to France. And that's true, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
He was not in town. He was not in the country when the Constitution was written. What they don't tell you is that Jefferson, regardless of the fact that he wasn't there, was in fact the intellectual father of the First Amendment. In fact, a similar law had already been in place in Virginia for years. In 1777, Thomas Jefferson wrote something called a Bill for Establishing Religious Freedom, which laid the groundwork for what eventually became the First Amendment. He drafted it in 1777, and in part it read, "To compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. That even the forcing him to support this or that teacher of his own religious persuasions is depriving him of the comfortable liberty of giving his contributions to the particular pastor whose morals he would make his pattern, and whose powers he feels most persuasive to righteousness, and is withdrawing from the ministry those temporary rewards which, proceeding from an approbation of their personal conduct, are an additional incitement to earnest and unremitting labors for the instructions of mankind. We, the General Assembly of Virginia, do enact that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in the matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities."
Talk about being a bit more on the nose.
Yeah.
A little bit more wordy.
Right, a little bit more wordy. But that's
the point
Jefferson there saying the government should not spend any money whatsoever in promoting a religion.
Yeah. And you should not be burdened with it.
And this document,
if you don't agree.
This document isn't completely unrelated to the Constitution, because in fact, Thomas Jefferson, this is kind of like a, this is kind of like the Kevin Bacon game. We're going to do some connections. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Bill for Establishing Religious Freedom, which, by the way, didn't pass until a few years later.
Okay.
But he wrote it, and he was close friends and the personal mentor to James Madison, who did write the First Amendment.
Okay.
They were the best of friends. They co-founded something called the Democrat-Republican Party, which sounds a little weird today.
Yeah.
And they were in constant correspondence with each other while the Constitution was being written.
Okay.
So there you go. And just in case there's any remaining doubt about what Madison meant, he wrote, in a letter to Robert Walsh on March 2nd, 1819.
And just to be clear, this is the guy who actually
wrote it.
The First Amendment. Okay.
"It was the universal opinion of the century preceding the last that civil government could not stand without the prop of a religious establishment, and that the Christian religion itself would perish if not supported by the legal provision for its clergy. The experience of Virginia conspicuously corroborates the disproof of both opinions. The civil government, though bereft of everything like an associated hierarchy, possesses the requisite stability and performs its functions with complete success, whilst the number, the industry, and the morality of the priesthood and the devotion of the people have been manifestly increased by the total separation of the church from the state."
Not to beat a horse or anything.
So,
but
this isn't something that was invented in 1947. This was all over the place.
Yeah. It's
when they
interesting
were
that
back then.
apparently the religious people had this idea that Christianity cannot stand on its own, according to Madison.
I guess so.
And so we need the government's help
To support it.
to actually support this. Otherwise, it's just going to go away.
Hasn't gone away.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would say, but still.
So there's that.
Okay.
There's another thing that you hear once in a while. Hold on. Okay, there's this guy named David Barton who wrote a book called The Myth of Separation. Guess which side he's on. He basically wrote the book to try and prove that that the Founding Fathers were devoutly religious guy who never meant the country to go in the direction that it's going.
Okay.
And David Barton quotes James Madison, who I also just quoted, as saying, pay attention to this one.
You'll be quizzed.
We have staked the whole future of American civilization, not upon the power of the government, far from it. We have staked the future of all our political institutions upon the capacity of mankind for self-government, upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves, to control ourselves, to sustain ourselves, according to the 10 Commandments.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, that's a shocker. Sounds like something Madison would have written too, doesn't it? But as far as I can tell, it's not something Madison wrote. It's something David Barton wrote.
Okay.
No quote has ever been found that exact quote has never been found by anyone among James Madison's writings. None of the biographers of Madison, past or present, have ever run across such a quote, and most, if not all, would love to know where this false quote originated.
Yeah.
Apparently, David Barton did not check the work of the secondary sources he quotes. Now, in Barton's bibliography, he attributed this quote not to Madison himself, but to Harold K. Lane from something called Liberty, Cry Liberty, from the Boston Lamb and Lamb Tractarian Society in 1939.
Now that sounds like a fair,
An unbiased
balanced,
source.
Yeah, unbiased source.
Now, Harold, I don't know what the Lamb and Lamb Tractarian Society is, but it sounds like somebody that writes tracts about Christianity. Also, 1939 is a long time ago, but when you're sourcing a quote, you have to go all the way back to the original source, because 1939 is still like 200 years after he would have written anything.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, 150.
Yeah.
So this is actually typical, I think, among the Christian Nation movement, that they just make stuff up and pass it along.
Start quoting each other.
Yeah, in fact, if you saw this on the internet, you probably wouldn't even see it attributed to David Barton. All the time I run across this thing, blah, 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 to sustain ourselves according to the 10 Commandments, unquote, James Madison.
Okay.
It doesn't say where, doesn't say where they got it.
Yeah.
You have to do your own homework.
Yeah. I'm wondering if possibly there was an original quote by somebody else who said, you know, Madison said something along the lines of, we should sustain ourselves.
Yeah.
And then they add,
and that continues.
They're adding to this quote of their own opinion, saying using the 10 Commandments.
I see that all the time. Somebody picks up a quote that really happened, except it was quoted by somebody else, and that somebody else added their own editorial opinion, and that editorial opinion somehow got made it on.
Melded into the quote, yeah.
You know, it's the spam phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, people pass on these things they heard because it sounds good, which is why some people still think that there's a little boy in a hospital who wants to receive
cards.
Who wants to receive get the world record for receiving the most postcards.
Yeah.
When in fact that boy left the hospital was 20 years ago. Okay, well, email wasn't widespread 20 years ago. It was 10 or 15.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Stop spamming us.
If you're gonna find, I try to do this too. If you find a quote that you really agree with, then the right thing to do is follow the chain of sourcing back to the original place. And the internet makes that so easy.
Yeah.
You should be able to do that. And quote the original source, quote what was before and after it, quote it in context. It's just good practice.
Yeah, context can be really important with those too.
Yeah. Now, another thing you hear a lot about what the Founding Fathers really intended to do, you hear that the first session of Continental Congress was opened with a prayer.
Yes.
And that there was an official prayer in Congress in the United States. Any idea when the first Continental Congress was held?
I believe it was before the writing of the Constitution, but I'm not too sure exactly on
It was
ordering or
September 7th, 1774. It was, in fact, even before the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
And the Constitution was written in 1787.
Okay.
So that's
13 years later?
13 years.
Okay.
Okay. I have the greatest respect for the Founding Fathers. They were very smart guys, very knowledgeable about creating governments, but unfortunately, I have one criticism: they didn't have the ability to predict the future. If they could, they might have said, "Oh my gosh, in 13 years, we're going to pass a law that says government can't get involved in religion.
Nah.
We better
Bunch of slackers.
we better not do this." So that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I always thought it would be so interesting if they could actually see a snippet of what kind of things have happened in the last 10 years in this country, just to get an idea of this kind of where it, they got.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
And just see what kind of changes they would have done in that situation to say, make this a little bit clearer, say, the right to bear arms, let's just take that one out again.
Well, I'm
or
sure
whatever.
people will disagree with that.
I'm sure they would, and it's speculation, and maybe it should be in there and such like that, but it would be interesting to see what their opinions are.
Yeah, well, I have opinions.
Nothing larger than a .22 Magnum.
I have opinions on the Second Amendment, but in the interest of not getting a bunch of
not
pro and
going
anti-gun
off
people
topic.
calling up,
Off
which
topic,
I'm not that interested in,
Bring it back to
drop
the
it.
first.
Okay, we're talking about the First Amendment, yes. Then you hear another one. Okay, I want to break for a sidebar here, which is that there is no question that a lot of the Founding Fathers were very religious men.
Yes.
There's no question. I mean, people throughout history have been very religious men. Most people have believed in some sort of a god.
Yeah.
A lot of them were devout Christians. A lot of them were deists, which is a belief that says that God basically wound up the universe and then let it go.
Yeah.
A lot of them consider themselves Universalist Unitarians, which is still a strong movement today, and also doesn't have anything very specific to say. But in deciding what the Founding Fathers intended, the important thing is that you have to actually look at what they wrote and where they explain what they intended, because it doesn't matter what beliefs they personally held. They believed that, like I do, that everybody has a right to their own beliefs, the government should not interfere with it, that nobody's tax dollars should go towards supporting a particular religion, for the reasons that Jefferson mentioned in his proposal for Virginia.
Yeah.
And people should just basically live and let live as far as religion is concerned.
Exactly.
And not get the government mixed up in it. Sometimes, though, the government does get mixed up in it, which, for instance, there's an email that I've seen going around that says all these state constitutions have reference to God in them.
Yeah.
And, there's issue, or they don't say they still have. Some of them say the original drafts had a reference to God.
Okay.
Of course, a lot of those state constitutions were actually written before the United States Constitution was.
Yes.
So again, can't predict the future.
Yeah.
So that's irrelevant. A lot of them were published, were drafted many years after the Founding Fathers had died. In the 1800s and beyond. And so while it troubles me that some of them have references to religion, you can't pin that on the Founding Fathers any more than you can pin on them the idea that we have under God in our pledge, because the pledge wasn't even written when they were around.
Yeah.
And the part about God was inserted in the 50s. But, you know, there are a few existing state constitutions which do, in fact, directly contradict the United States constitutions, and something ought to be done about that. For instance, let's take a look at these articles side by side. The Tennessee State Constitution, as it stands now, Article 8, Section 2, says, "No person who denies the being of God or a future state of rewards and punishments shall hold any office in the civil department of this state."
Wow. Okay.
That was actually written like really early on.
Okay.
And it's been a holdover right through today. Contrast that to the United States Constitution, where Article 6 says, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States."
Okay. Which one trumps the other?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that, because for about 100 years, neither one would trump the other.
Okay.
Because one of them is the federal constitution, and one is the state-level constitution, and the attitude for the first 100 years was basically, states can do whatever they want,
Okay.
but this applies to the federal government.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that led to an unpleasant side effect. By the way, you can put up the phone number. I'm almost done. That led to an unpleasant side effect, which was slavery.
Oopsie.
Many states had decided that slavery was not a good idea anymore, but many of the other states decided that, the government has no business telling me whether I can own a slave or not.
Yeah.
So you had slave states and free states, and they decided what was and was not okay on a state-by-state basis.
Okay.
Now, the Civil War was fought, and at the end of the Civil War, a new amendment was passed which emancipated the slaves. It was the 14th Amendment. But a side effect of the 14th Amendment was also this: "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws."
Okay.
Now, you can see why they passed that. It's because they didn't want individual states to decide that they would go back to being slave states.
Yeah. Yeah.
But another consequence of that was basically it's been interpreted by the courts over the years that what this means is anything in the federal constitution does, in fact, trump the state constitutions.
Okay.
So things change, and often the change is for the better. For instance, there used to be a similar law in Maryland that said that there should be a religious test before you can be allowed to hold office. And that was overturned in a 1961 case, Torcaso versus Watkins, and that part of their constitution was overturned by the Supreme Court on the grounds that they can't have something that overrides the federal constitution. So, to date, the Tennessee Constitution hasn't gotten that sort of challenge, but if it were, strictly based on legal precedent, my guess is that it would go the same way as the Maryland Constitution.
Yeah.
So if there are any visiting atheists from Tennessee, and I'm sure there are tons,
Please call in.
get on that. That's it.
Yeah, I think even Texas, in our Constitution or something like that, for not test for public office, but you have to say a pledge that I will uphold the laws of Texas under God.
Yes.
Or, with the help of God. And that's been taken as, it's a religious test. I think it's one of those things that isn't enforceable, though.
Right.
They don't really put that in. You can take a secular oath if you want when becoming an office or...
Yeah, there certainly are gray areas, and again, it's important to keep that in mind because some people take this position that all atheists are extremists who would ban religion outright if they could.
Yeah.
And I just said that we wouldn't, and so individual students praying in school,
Of course.
good.
Yeah.
prayer over the loudspeaker, officially led by the school, bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Again, this is the Atheist Experience. We are live today, and we're on for a little bit less than an hour. Still left to go. Phone lines are open. The phone number's on your screen. Go ahead and give us a call, and we're going to start by going to Larry. How you doing?
Oh, doing great. How are you guys?
Hi, Larry.
Pretty well.
Hey, just had one comment about the separation of church and state, and that is that I think as Americans we get kind of used to our own environment. People who've actually been out in the world and gone to different countries, it becomes readily apparent why we have separation of church and state.
Yeah.
For instance, if you go to Saudi Arabia, you'll quickly find out that they have two kinds of police. The police if you do something wrong, and the police if you violate something of their religious beliefs.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think the Founding Fathers kind of saw that, and that's the reason why we have the freedoms we have. And as Americans, we kind of get blinded to that at times, I think.
Exactly.
Of course, Christians dismiss that with special pleading. They say, well, that's because Islam is an evil religion.
Well, yeah, there's no pleading ignorance there, I mean, people can say all kinds of, let's say, creative things.
I like that.
Good point.
I had a question, though, and I had a big discussion with a friend of mine this weekend who is a Christian, that, and I've heard this 100 times, that, and to take this completely off the subject, that life actually had been created in a lab. And I know I've seen this, I've read this places, that with two inorganic materials and a spark that
You're talking about the Miller-Urey experiment.
I'm sorry?
The Miller-Urey experiment.
Miller-Urey experiment.
Yeah,
Cool.
U-R-E-Y and Miller. That was in the 50s, I think.
Cool. I will write that down.
I don't know that it was life they created, but it was like a self-replicating process, which is one of the basic prerequisites to life.
Yeah.
So, but, I mean, you should be able to look that up.
Okay, great. Cool. Well, thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Sean.
Have a good one.
Another thing to point out is I actually had an article sent to me, this was a couple months back, about this whole separation of church and state, and they got into a whole bunch of quotes from the Founding Fathers saying, we are godly men and we press the Ten Commandments and whatnot. And when I was replying to that, I was trying to think of how to reply to this in a good way, and I started off by saying, we can play the quote wars if you want. And there are quotes for both sides, but you should be looking also at what is the right thing to be doing. Not just perhaps what did they intend or what did they write, but let's look at, through history, what is the correct thing to do? What is the right thing to do? And having the government promote and sponsor and back your religion always sounds good as long as it's your religion.
Exactly.
When it starts being somebody else's religion, that's when it starts being scary.
Yeah, if you lived if you were a Baptist, as many Texans are, and you moved to Utah, where a lot of the state laws are focused on Mormons, you would see what we're talking about.
Exactly. Separation
of church and state is not to protect atheists from Christians, it's to protect all possible religions from each other.
Yeah. So,
and non-religions.
Yeah. So it's an important point. Again, it's better if the government stays out.
Right.
Versus
as
sticking
much
its
as
nose
possible.
In. Exactly. All right. Anyway, let's go on to another caller. We have got George. How you doing?
George.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you guys?
Quite well.
Funny, I used to live in an area where that was dominated by the Mormon Church, and it was interesting to see that, and then move down here to Texas and see the domination by the Baptists. So, exactly what you're talking about.
I lived in San Diego for a few years when I was in college, and they had this giant Mormon temple that was like a big Disneyland castle in the street somewhere. They were just building it when I lived there. My roommate once said, it was like a big white castle thing. My roommate once said that if he had an unlimited amount of money to play with, he thought a great joke would be to build an exact replica of it that was black right across the street.
My question today, actually I have a couple of them, but we'll deal with them as long as you guys can. The first one is I'm interested in finding out how the tax exemption for churches came about. And I'll ask you why. I mean, there's a lot of real estate, and today with property taxes, of course, the battle that we have there with funding of schools and things like that. I also understand that in the past the churches were basically the majority or the entities that helped the poor and helped that were the charities, I guess, of the day. And of course, with the government taking over that area with food stamps and things like that, a lot of that I see has kind of gone away. But yet, I see a lot of property, a lot of real estate, a lot of money that is basically tax-free. That is, that is not serving the same purposes that I see that it used to be, or else I think we'd have a lot less of the poverty that we see today. My second question, I guess, and the first one was about, tell me how that works, the tax exemption thing. The second thing was churches and public buildings then, because I've seen around town where churches are meeting in schools, and and that's on a Sunday, usually on Sundays, and I'm interested in seeing how that is not a separation, and again, if they have to pay for it, if they're not paying for the use of the building, how's that working? Mm. The final question was basically how to go about if you see religious symbols within a school or within another public building. I've seen the battle in, what state was that? Arkansas? No, where they removed the Ten Commandments from...
Alabama.
Thank you.
Oh, right, yeah.
And, I saw that went like, boy, that was a pretty big issue with the papers and stuff. But anyway, these are things that I'm seeing that they're kind of subtle, especially with the symbols. Sometimes, you go in, and if a church is meeting there, they might leave a little crucifix up on top of the flag or something like that. And and again, again, the other part was about the tax exemption. And I'll go ahead and just let you guys go. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. As for the tax exemption, I don't know if you have anything specifically on that. Do you know anything?
No, I'll play devil's advocate, as it were,
okay.
And explain what I think is the justification for churches being tax exempt. Maybe someone else can call in and set me straight on that. I believe it's sort of like an agreement. I mean, the whole separation of church and state goes both ways. It goes from state to church and church to state. Religion has certain rules. I mean, churches have certain rules which they agree to follow or lose their tax exempt status, which basically says they can't get involved in politics. Yeah. They can't endorse people for government. They can't fund a political campaign, stuff like that. Normal citizens can do that, and normal citizens pay taxes. So from everything I've heard, if there were no tax exemption, then churches would be able to get in on politics to an even greater extent than they already do, which is already a lot,
Yeah. I don't know if they can make donations to political parties and such.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could definitely see a church all of a sudden having political sway, saying, look at our member base and look at the amount of money we have and such, and, conform to our will. So. Right.
So I've heard arguments on both sides about whether there should be tax exemption for churches, and I don't really know what side I'm on.
Yeah. Also, I talked a couple weeks back on the church, not the Scientologists, but Christian Scientists.
Oh, yeah.
And they have something where if you are a Christian Science practitioner, meaning that you try and heal somebody's cancer, or sickness, or cold, or flu, or whatever by praying over them, essentially. Then
because they don't believe in doctors or the reality of suffering.
Exactly. They don't believe in doctors or anything like that. So if you make money by doing something like that because you're a Christian Science practitioner, that money is not taxable.
They said that, or that's actually true?
That's actual tax documents.
Oh.
So if you're a Christian Science practitioner, money that you make from the practice, and
Right.
only that money, is not taxable.
But interestingly enough, they're not subject to a government review of, well, can you actually
Exactly.
prove that you heal people more
Exactly.
often than would be predicted by chance?
Exactly.
Oh, that's great.
As for the churches and public buildings, I know one factor in that is equal access. Christian groups, just because there are so many of them, may be the ones to usually get it because they're usually the ones who ask about it.
Right.
But ideally, we, the atheist community, should be able to go to them and say, look, we want to have a meeting, and can we use your gymnasium or something like that? And
Yeah,
we should
exactly.
And we should get full access. I don't see any real problem with that, with hosting it in public buildings, if everybody has access and they're not restricting it.
Yeah, it's fair to allow, I think it's entirely reasonable that a building that allows any use of it publicly should allow churches.
Exactly.
But there are special cases, like for instance, there was that case with the Boy Scouts a
Yes.
while back,
Yeah.
where the Boy Scouts were basically renting public spaces for $1 for the
Yeah.
entire year.
Yeah.
And when the whole flap came out about how they don't allow gay people, or atheists, which was essentially because of religion, there was that guy Daryl Lambert who got kicked out because he was an atheist.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it was, well, you guys are discriminating on the basis of religion, so you should not be allowed. Nobody wanted to disband the Boy Scouts,
Yeah.
but they did kind of look askance at the policy of giving them official government property and not really charging them hardly anything for it.
Yeah. And also, I think part of it is a lack of challenge.
Yeah,
Has
definitely that.
Has anyone brought this up and said, look, this isn't fair, we shouldn't do this, and so on?
Yeah, because I mentioned this thing in the Tennessee Constitution.
Yeah.
Sometimes things which are bad laws just stay around for a long time
Yeah.
until somebody goes and challenges it, like our buddy Michael Newdow.
Yeah. And I think the religious symbols in public places go in the same way. Have they been challenged? And if they haven't, then they can just stay up until somebody complains about it. Nobody complains, they're going to stay up.
Yeah.
All right.
There was one more question.
Okay.
How do you go about removing religious symbols?
Okay.
Or what do you do?
Oh, what can you do in that case? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the main thing is just make it known.
Yeah.
A lot of times, if you just bring it up in an informative way.
Right. Well, write letters to the editor. You can go to city council meetings.
Exactly.
And, I would think a lawsuit would be the last resort.
Yeah.
But
it's a bit strong-arming.
yeah.
Which actually leads on to a story.
Oh.
We can go over really quick. Again, phone number is on your screen. We are a live call-in show. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and please give us a call. But I don't have the actual story with me. Actually, yes, I do. It's in here somewhere. Council members. This was in Florida. A lot of times city council meetings such will have some kind of invocation at the beginning, usually by a religious person of some kind. Say, may God guide your decisions and make good ones and whatnot. Usually it's Christians. Occasionally they'll be nice and say we can have a Jewish or a Muslim or whatever person come in and give it. Not very often do you get the atheists raising their hands saying, can I? They did in Florida, though.
Florida, from what I understand, has a very active atheist
Yes.
base.
Exactly. So they had this invocation opening at all the council meetings in Tampa City. An atheist came forward and said, I would like to give the invocation, and since it's a public forum, it should have equal access. He should be allowed to speak just as much as any religious person is. They agreed with him and said, yeah, sure, okay, fine. Gave him a date, and then when he actually went there, half of the council, which granted is only 6 people.
Half the council.
Well, 3 people walked out. Apparently it's council of 6.
Okay.
3 of them got up and walked out on him before he even spoke. Just knowing that he's an atheist. It doesn't say in this article, unfortunately, but some of the quotes that they had were really bad. They were along the lines of, I can't bear to listen to anyone who doesn't believe in a higher power. And these it was just such blatant quotes that they had by some of the council members who walked out.
That was by the mayor.
Oh, that was the mayor who said that? Okay.
Now I respect their right to walk out, but they're butt heads.
Exactly. Now, if he was saying something really off base, then that would be another story. But according to this, Harvey told the council his group was committed to separation of church and state and asked board members to seek inspiration from history, science, and logic. Mm-hmm. When you're making decisions, for me, sounds like a fairly logical thing to do, but apparently not to everybody else. So anyway, we have got a couple more callers lined up. We'll go ahead and get to them, and we have got John. How you doing?
Yeah, I had a question for you.
Right.
From what I understand, y'all are basically saying that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were theists.
I didn't say that specifically.
I know most of the founding fathers, I believe most of them were deists.
Jefferson, if I may head you off at the pass, I don't know whether this is going to
answer the question or not.
Whether this is part of what you were going to say. But Jefferson did have some quotes like, I regard myself as a Christian in the only true sense of the word, and then he went on to say that Jesus was a really cool guy who taught some smart things. But he did not. He did not.
Bible or something like that.
Yeah, he didn't believe that Jesus was divine. He, in fact, wrote his own version of the Bible where he basically cut out all the magic bits and just left the things that he thought Jesus said that were cool.
Okay, so then then basing the Bible as the cornerstone of liberty is a misquote from him.
I'm not familiar with.
Haven't heard of that one specifically.
Okay. And then I was kind of curious about George Washington when he stated that it is impossible to rightly govern the world without God and the Bible.
Christian. I never said anything else.
So.
Okay, so I'm sorry. What did you say?
79 of the original constitutional signers were all devout Christians and confirmed Christians.
Okay,
and 23 of those.
But again,
23 of those had seminary degrees.
Okay, but going back to a really important point. Just because you're religious doesn't mean that you believe you should impose your religion on anyone else.
Right. With all those religious people, it's a good thing they managed to draft a constitution that says that the government shall not interfere with religion.
Exactly. Whether they were religious or not is kind of beside the point. They didn't think that government should be imposing religion on anybody.
And how is that? Because that goes against a lot of Christian beliefs for intolerance.
What?
Well, basically, Christianity is a very intolerant religion when it comes to a lot of things.
Yeah.
So how does that fit in your little puzzle?
There are a lot of Christians walking around today who say that it should be a live and let live society, despite what the Bible says.
Then they're not Christians.
Oh, okay. Well, then luckily we don't live in a Christian nation because the majority of people... Going back to what that guy on Hannity and Combs said, we're a Christian nation because most people are Christians. But according to people like this guy, to actually be a Christian, you have to hold some very specific beliefs and be intolerant.
Exactly.
And if that's the standard, then actually we don't live in a Christian nation. Thank you.
If you're not a Christian bigoted pig, then you're not a real Christian. I love that. They're not real Christians.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's go on to.
We now bring you to Brian, who is going to hell.
Brian, how you doing?
Hi, I'm just calling to tell you that, I found out that, earlier today I was driving along and I saw a guy on the side of the highway flying a sign and he looked real thirsty, so I went and bought him a soda and gave it to him, man. Since I'm atheist, I'm going to hell.
If you're an atheist, yeah, you're going to hell. You're
I try to work it, but I can't seem to make it to heaven because I'm an atheist.
The goodness of man is but filthy rags before the judgment of God. And crap like that.
I try.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you're going to hell.
It might be fun, though.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
Hey, I'll see you there.
We'll be ahead of you in the line, I'm sure.
All right, bye.
By the way, I have it on good authority that hell does exist. Hell? Yes! Still waiting for that guy to call in.
Nah,
What? Oh, okay, here you go.
you hung up.
Again, this is a present I got before the show,
Yeah. Yeah, every now and
which
then.
I haven't read, and I won't unless I have a good reason to.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple different things on the show, a couple books mailed to us and such. It's always interesting when that happens because we're still here. All right, we have got Jordan. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. What you got for us?
I was just, being atheist, what do you feel about creation and all? Like, about all the stuff around us? Like,
Just the fact that we have a world, essentially.
yeah, we have
I
a
am
world.
in favor of creating things.
Do what again?
I'm pro-creation. I'm in favor of creating things.
You're in favor of creating things? Well, where the hell did you come from then?
My parents,
Yeah.
Where did they come from? Where's the start?
their parents.
Where's the start? I mean,
You're implying that there has to be a first something or other.
Yeah.
And we don't really know that for a fact. We have never seen anything created. Period.
Again, I'm in favor of creating things. People create things.
Depends on your
see things
definition. Depends on
created?
your definition of create.
Yeah.
What we do is we take stuff that's already there, rearrange it, and make it into different
No,
stuff.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying we
that's not
see
creation.
things get created all the time. In fact, the reason we know that some things are created is because we see other things that aren't created, and there's a difference.
Again, it depends on your definition of create.
Okay.
Everything that we have seen in our history and everything that we have any evidence of is taking stuff that's already there, rearranging it, and making it into different stuff.
Okay. If you want
in order to make different stuff, we have to have something to start with.
Exactly.
true.
Exactly. So we have
Luckily,
never,
we do.
Exactly. We have never in any of our existence or in any of our observations seen something just poof out of nothing. Ignoring quantum physics for the moment, we'll just set that aside.
Okay.
But in the real world, we haven't actually just seen poof a tree come out into existence or something like that.
But if we're ignoring quantum physics, then aren't we ignoring all physical law and everything else? We're just ignoring...
Again, that's a side point. I'm going somewhere else with this.
Okay. Continue.
Essentially, we're assuming that there had to be a start, and we can think that maybe there wasn't anything before, and it all got here somehow. Why do we have to assume that? Why can't we assume that stuff has always been here, in some form or another?
You
We
know,
don't have to assume
there
it.
are numerous competing scientific theories on the
Exactly.
subject of where stuff originated.
What is your personal
and
theory?
there are a lot of different ones, and this is, we're not science PhDs, so the best thing to do actually is to go to the source and do some research about what people say probably happened at the beginning of the universe.
Okay.
Who have studied this stuff and are in a position to know. People who do know things about quantum physics, unlike us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, did you have anything else for us?
What is just real quick, what is your personal opinion on how things started?
I'll let you answer in a second. I don't have a strong opinion. I've read a couple different theories. I haven't seen any really good solid evidence or arguments for any one particular argument, so I don't know. I'm letting the scientists kind of hash it out and figure it out and argue about it. Once they have something a little more substantial, I'll ask them.
I personally like the theory advanced by my friend Paul Wilson, who who said that the universe could actually be basically a black hole in another universe, which is a black hole in another universe, and that every universe that has black holes actually spawns an entire new universe inside it, and that these universes actually go through a process of evolution as each one gets more and more intricate. Of course, I'll be the first one to admit that I only like that because it sounds really neat. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know how that is, so I don't know much about how it works. But I find it a lot more plausible than there was some magic guy who cares about our sex life and listens to our prayers every day and says, "Let there be a world."
That sounds a little better than black hole and black hole and black hole, don't you think?
No.
Well, that's a matter of opinion.
Indeed. I'll give that to you.
Okay.
Well, appreciate talking to you, boys.
Okay,
All right.
thanks for calling.
See you later.
Bye. I do remember that talk that Paul was giving. I mean, this was like at 3 o'clock in the morning one time during a party.
Yeah, party.
It was one of those things that sounds really friggin' far out.
Yeah.
Probably no basis in reality, but there was some
think
talk to it that said
I wouldn't say it has no basis in reality.
No. Okay.
It's very speculative. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. Yeah. It sounded really interesting though.
Yeah.
But that's Paul for you.
Anyway, that's my favorite origin theory. But of course, you have to keep in mind that in addition to all the scientific hypotheses about how the universe might have gotten started, there isn't any one creation story that's religious in nature. I mean, you know, there are all kinds of stories, like there's an Indian story about how God actually made a batch of cookies, and they were too dark, so he threw them in Africa, and he made a batch of another batch of cookies, and he didn't let them cook long enough, and they were too white, so he threw them all in Europe.
And then he got a little bit too much cinnamon.
And then he got it exactly right the third time, so he said, "These are my people," and he made them the American Indians. You know, so I mean, you know, there's
taker.
Of course, you know, without a particular reason to believe that one of these theories is true, you can't just say, well, we have to believe that because there's nothing else. Because there's millions of other.
Yeah, and until we get some kind of scientific evidence backing up one or the other or some of them, then we just kind of got to go from there.
Okay.
Anyway, 30 minutes left in the show. Phone number is on your screen. Go ahead and give us a call, and we'll get you on the air. We have got Thomas. How you doing?
Oh, fine.
Okay, what you got for us?
Well, shoot, I watch your show all the time.
Okay, thank you.
I really like it. It's actually the first time I've been able to get through.
Okay.
Oh, no, congratulations.
People fail to see one thing, is that religion was invented by man for man's use and abuse.
Okay.
I mean, that's the honest truth. It doesn't matter what religion, but man has totally abused man for all time, and religion is one powerful tool to do it with.
Yeah. I can definitely see religion and the belief in God and such being a creation of man. I mean, I support that. I get a little bit touchy when it starts as for the use and abuse of people. I'm sure there's lots of stories out there to go both ways. I typically try and have a kindler and gentler view of human nature and say they didn't do it specifically to be abusive and specifically to keep the huddled masses coming to them and, you know, crying out for food and crying out for comfort and whatever. I typically look at it more as everyone was trying to do the right thing. They found that religion was a helpful tool to get what they thought was right across. And so everyone kind of had the right ideas in mind, just went about it the wrong way and ended up being wrong ideas or wrong methods. Again, that's my kindler and gentler view of the world, so I don't know how much.
I'd be uncomfortable saying that religion was created by man because, well, obviously I believe that's true.
Very true.
I recognize it as an opinion because if, in fact, there turns out to be a God, then you're wrong. Now, do I think there is going to turn out to be a God? No. But it's my policy that unless you know things for pretty darn sure, that you don't say, well, this is absolutely true and there's no arguing with it, because there's always arguing with it.
Yeah.
Well, this is true. I mean, you can make those kind of statements, but it's just like the existence of time. there is no such thing as time. That is man-made to measure his own lifespan.
Well, but it's measuring something that actually is
Something
there.
real.
Well, it's only...
I mean, time may not be exactly the way we
man-made.
perceive it, but it does measure something that's objective.
Yeah, it's outside of our.
As in how?
It's outside of our simple perception. It's not just something that we made up.
Well, I mean, by the
it's
scientific
real.
method, if I time my stopwatch for a second and you time your stopwatch for a second, we'll both come out to about the same thing. I mean, if time weren't real, then you could do a second and I could do a second, and at the same time, you would wind up not stopping your watch till 10 years later.
Yeah, vastly.
Now,
Okay.
in relativity, that actually happens, but that happens in a specific, measurable way.
Okay, well then you basically you're going right back to the quantum physics theory, as in
No,
if
how's that?
we don't
Quantum
know
physics
and we don't
relativity
have an
aren't the same
answer,
thing.
how can we understand?
What?
Understand what?
I mean, if I was to understand God, I'd be God.
Not necessarily.
No, you could be a guy
Oh,
who
well.
understands God.
If you understand
Maybe
how
it's
cats
not-
work, doesn't make you a cat.
Maybe it's not meant for us to understand, and maybe we're beating
Well, then
our heads against the wall.
chances are then, if God said, you're not meant to understand me, then chances are he doesn't really demand that we kowtow and bow down and alter our sex life and, offer him, burnt goats and whatever.
Well, you see, I don't feel that God ever asked us that. I feel that mankind infringed that upon man
How do you
to
know?
get his own way.
How do you know he never asked you that? I mean, I know he didn't ask you personally, but how did you know he didn't ask somebody who wrote it down? If I may play the Christian advocate once again.
Exactly. It is
Okay.
possible that the Old Testament is correct and God was stomping around, the world that long time ago saying, look, you got to burn a bull once a week for me. I'm going to get real pissed off.
Yeah,
Well,
and
then
Abraham, kill your son. Oh, psych!
Oh, okay, then you've got another question. Just like you said that the Constitution wasn't actually written until 1787, 13 years later. Well, what's to say that all these biblical writings and everything else are also true, especially when we've got so many from all around the world organizing different religions and
Just to be clear, we don't think they are true. We're
Okay.
atheists.
that's what I'm asking you. I mean, you're making a statement very similar.
Now, I think saying that we have evidence of what the founding father... Now, maybe I'm catching the wrong end of the stick here,
Okay.
but we have evidence of the founding fathers' existence, what they wrote, what they thought. We have documentation of it, all that kind of stuff. We don't have the same for a supernatural being out there who can create universes and stomping around the world a couple thousand years ago. We don't have any level of evidence to back any of that up. That's why we can go to the Constitution and other documents, say, yeah, Jefferson actually did live. Here's the stuff that he thought. Here's what he wrote about, and here's what he actually wrote. Whereas we can't go back and say the same thing about a God.
Okay.
Is that kind of what you were talking about?
Okay. Madison, Jefferson, and Washington were all three Masons
Okay.
from the old country from England.
Okay.
So
They
they
were the
secretly
wealthiest.
ruled the world in a little cavil, is maybe what you're going to say next.
In other words, we've never had a democracy.
Oh, boy.
Every time I hear George Bush say, we're spreading democracy, it just makes me sick.
Yeah, we're spreading republicanism.
It makes
or
me sick
a
too,
republic.
but this may be better fodder for Alex Jones than us.
Well, the last democracy that was ever about that I know of in history was probably the Eskimos or the American Indians.
Okay. And how does this relate back to religion?
To religion, because
Again,
you've
it's
got
the
a
atheist
small
experience, just trying to get on
minority.
topic.
Well, you've got a minority that is in control financially, and we live in a bureaucracy. And so, therefore, they use Christianity to manipulate it and to stay in power.
Wow, now there's a conspiracy theory for you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is it just George Bush, or was Clinton a Mason?
Oh no, it's been going on since. I mean, even back.
So Kennedy was a Mason, Clinton was a Mason, Jimmy Carter was a Mason.
No. I did not say that.
Okay.
You said that. I did.
So, do we have any evidence that? Let's run with the fun idea that they were Masons, which I've seen some things.
I know there are actual Masons. There's a real organization.
Yeah. And what I mean is the Founding Fathers.
Right.
But regardless of the fact, let's run with the fact that they were Masons or Christians or Jewish or deist or atheist or whatever. That doesn't mean that what they did was think that their view should be imposed on everyone else. So I don't really care all that much about what they actually believe themselves. Let's look at what they thought should be happening in the government that they created. I have personal beliefs myself, but I don't think that those should be imposed on everyone else, and everyone should think just like I do. So if I found a country one day, I'm not going to say, this is what I believe, and all of you had better damn well agree with it. Everyone has a right to believe what they want to believe. That's what the Founding Fathers essentially said, regardless of what they personally believed. Now, if you've got evidence showing otherwise, that it was some nefarious plot, that's going to take quite a bit to back that up.
Okay, I gave you the wrong impression. I didn't mean that there was a plot.
Okay.
I'm just saying it's something that's been going on for hundreds of years. It's a power grab, and it always has been.
So religion in general, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, I'm with you there.
Religion, money, and power, it all goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, that's inevitable. See, I enjoyed that. all these months I've watched y'all, and I can actually talk to you. That's cool.
Okay. Well, good talking to you.
All right.
Bye. Okay. Thanks a lot for calling.
See ya.
Again, I always get a little bit touchy when people say that they use religion specifically to control people.
Well, I think there's evidence that actually has been done. I mean,
it has been done,
in the Middle Ages, there were popes who put on this public face, and then they had these huge mansions and threw wild sex parties. I mean,
yeah, it has happened. But I don't think that if you go to the Baptist church down the street, the preacher in there is going to be in his back room, rubbing his hands evilly, saying, "How can I conjure all these people now?" I don't think that's what actually happens. And as far as you go up the chain, I don't think it's the Pope that's sitting there saying, "Let's see how we can scam everybody now." Mm-hmm. I don't think it works like that. I think everybody's got the best intention.
Yeah, I think there are people who believe it, and there are some people who don't believe it but claim to, or people who manage to talk themselves into it because it's convenient.
Exactly.
It takes all kinds.
Yeah.
But just because Jefferson, Madison, and Washington were religious or did belong to a particular club doesn't mean that proves anything about what they were trying to do.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, going to a couple more callers. We have got Rick. How you doing?
Hey, Ray. Hey, Ashley. How you doing?
Pretty well. What you got for us?
I got three different things to say. Let me go ahead and answer the first one. Let me try and answer that guy's question. You can either control society either through fear or hope. And all this time it's been through fear, God-fearing.
Okay.
So-called Illuminati, they were called the Brotherhood back then.
Yeah.
Okay, and they figured out, well, if we create Christianity and get everybody to believe in one God instead of a whole bunch of different gods, we can control them, and all this time it's been that way.
Okay.
And as far as who wrote the Bible, don't know. It's been proven that Mark, Luke, John, all those guys had nothing to do with it.
You've read you sound like someone who's read the Da Vinci Code.
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Anyway, on the other thing about the creation of the planet and the universe,
okay.
I have a tape on David Icke, and he actually does a controlled experiment. I mean, this is really cool to watch. It's a controlled experiment, and through sound and frequency, you can see the formation of the planet. It's so cool.
Okay, like through sound, or not like sound, but
sound
shockwave pulses, essentially?
Like sound and frequency. It's like, how do I explain this? It's like DNA. I mean, the sound makes them form a certain way.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And what was I think you said a name of a guy?
David Icke. You might even be able to look him up on the computer.
Okay, all right. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks for calling. All right. Again, we're probably going to get the phone number up on the screen. We've got 15 minutes left. It's the Atheist Experience, and we are live today. We also have reruns every Tuesday, Channel 10 at 4:30. But that will be a tape. It will not be live, so if you're watching this on Tuesday, please don't call us. You'll get somebody else's show. Let's go on to Adam. How you doing?
Hi, fellas. How you doing?
Pretty good. What you got for us?
Well, a few things, actually. I'll run through some of them really quick.
Okay.
First of all, I kind of see time as like water. There's water all over the universe. It couldn't be measured. We have water on Earth.
Yes.
And we react to it in a way that we can measure because it is what we react to.
Okay.
Okay.
So, you know,
But if
that was...
if the water elsewhere in the universe has the same properties as the water here, then we can assume certain things about it.
Oh, absolutely. No. What I'm saying, though, is that if, you know, we were to go, say, to another planet, grab water, you know, in whatever form, bring it back and look at it, it would be hydrogen dioxide.
Right.
That is, you know...
by definition, because that's what
well,
water is.
if it's something else, then, you know...
It's not water.
In this case, you know, a rose by any other name is something different.
Right.
Yeah. I've also heard kind of a few of the last callers calling in. I would say skirting a little close to agnosticism, really kind of not necessarily questioning religion, but questioning whether or not there is a God.
Okay. I know a couple of them were going with the idea that there is a God,
right?
But religion is man-made, and
right.
It depends on how factual you want to be. It's possible that there is a God, one of these deist gods out there who made the universe and then hands off, and all these people interpreted that and said, ooh, wow, then we have to sacrifice bulls to him, which is essentially religion, in which case that's man-made. Or there could have been, again, very unlikely, but God could have come down and said, I exist and you must sacrifice bulls to me.
Right.
In which case, God kind of did it.
Sure. Well, I look at it in terms of this, you know, of course, we've chosen the way that we believe or not believe. But if there is a God, I can't imagine for a moment he would give a rat's ass about
a bull.
What we thought of him. You know, whether or not we built a church.
Well, I can imagine it, but
right, how likely?
I would
likely.
Yeah, that God would be far from perfect if he's got such an ego problem that these tiny little creatures on this tiny little planet.
Right.
Really have to do all this for him.
Right.
He's got a big ego problem if that's the case.
Right. We're that existence of a thing to look down and say, now that's a nice church.
And hey, you're being gay. Stop that.
Now, one other thing is, I think that one of the things that religion has helped people to do is explain the inexplicable. And I think that most people would be hard-pressed to count to 1,000, never mind 4 billion. And, to go back to the beginning of what, most scientists believe was the beginning of this planet, and to trace the evolution of this planet and to see all of the different things that have happened, 4 billion is a pretty inconceivable number.
Yeah.
Never mind the beginning of this galaxy, never mind the beginning of the universe. And, there are scientists who agree that we can count backwards through time to something ridiculous like 10 to the negative 14th of a second.
Yeah.
I think it was actually 40-something,
okay.
43.
Right,
anyway,
okay.
Point
so,
taken.
I'm pretty sure that once we cover that last little bit of space there, the grand unified theory, all that stuff, I think that we'll be able to explain a whole heck of a lot more than we're able to now. Back in the day, when the earth was flat, it was because God said so, and the Bible said so.
Yeah.
And that it was created in, such an amount of time.
Yeah,
and
people
blah, blah,
like
blah.
stories. They like answers. And so when they don't have an answer to something, that's kind of scary.
Right.
And so it would be nice to make up a story and say, well, there's this really powerful guy out there, and he did it.
And even the I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at A Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking's, kind of
I've rifled
gloss
through it.
over, this stuff, even at its most, pedestrian level, all of this stuff is over my head.
Yeah.
So to start digging through the brains of, people, Einstein on forward, who had just, completely radical theories on how the universe and interacts, within itself.
Yeah.
These stories, fables, so on, gave people the comfort to know that there is order, and and we can be assured that tomorrow the sun will rise.
Yeah.
And I think that in that way, yes, religion for the powerful can be a tool for fear. But I also think that for the average Joe, religion is a way to close your eyes at night and go to sleep, knowing that, yes, there is order in the universe, and there is a just and merciful God that is going to protect me, my family, my country.
Right. And I do think that a big part of being an atheist is just being able to take that step and say, well, there are some things I just don't know, and I may not ever know them, but I'd rather not know than make something up.
But and I guess to add on to that, and I guess in a sense to contradict something that I said before, I do believe that God exists.
Okay.
But I believe that God exists for them.
Well, that gets on to the fact of, there's an objective universe out there. Things either do or don't exist outside of, our heads and imaginations.
Yeah.
Right. There are things that are created as fiction in people's brains. You can say that Oliver Twist exists because Dickens wrote a story about him, and that had to come from somewhere, and it was Dickens' brain. But in another sense, to say that Oliver Twist actually exists as a real person is a big difference.
Well, now, if Oliver Twist had or if the concept of Oliver Twist had the power to launch an inquisition, then yes, I would definitely say that, that Oliver Twist exists outside of merely a character in a book.
Well, I wouldn't. I would say the Inquisition exists, and I would say it was spawned by the idea of Oliver Twist, but not a real guy named Oliver Twist.
No.
Perhaps a better analogy, though, is Santa. Kids can actually alter their behavior because they believe that if they're good, now it usually only lasts for 10 minutes or so, but, assuming that they're good, they'll get a present at Christmas.
Right.
From Santa. Does it alter their behavior? Yeah. Is it a belief in something that's not real that alters it? Yes. But that doesn't make Santa as a outside entity real.
Well,
just because you believe in it doesn't mean that that basis is real.
And I think that this is perhaps most important, is not knowing any better. Or not believing any better.
Okay.
As a 5-year-old, Santa exists.
Yeah.
It is a real thing.
But
as a matter of fact, it's almost tangible. But then you're 8, and maybe for the first time you see mom and dad carrying the.
Yeah.
And to me, mom and dad carrying the gifts in. For me, that was being exposed to people like Einstein and Stephen Hawking. Those were, I watched. Those were the gifts that were coming in. I was like, you know what? As a matter of fact, maybe God isn't. I mean, I was baptized. I was brought up, in a quasi-Catholic family.
Yeah.
But but we don't say that Santa Claus existed in 1980, but he stopped existing in 1981. I think
again,
that's silly.
The objective
that depends on what year you saw mom and dad walk in with those presents.
No, we're not talking
the year
about.
I'm talking about is arbitrary.
Yeah, we're not talking about the real, about your belief or your actions or anything like that. We're talking about the real physical universe. Santa Claus as defined by mythology or whatever you want to call it, isn't a real person that walking around that you can pick up and interrogate. He doesn't exist, and he hasn't existed. It's not like when I first saw my parents bringing down the gifts, all of a sudden he poofed out of existence. He wasn't there in the first place. Now, I could have altered my behavior because I believed in him, and that would be real. But that doesn't mean that he's real.
Well, I think that it also you may have to define belief. I mean, is it a set of is it knowledge of things that you know and have learned and are able to make at least a hypothesis based on the information that you've gathered? If that's the case, then for some people, God exists simply because the Bible exists. It is the Word of God. For me, God doesn't exist simply because there are other pieces of knowledge that I have acquired through my 38 years of, drawing breath that say to me, you know what, okay, the Bible, yeah, fine, not the Word of God. Good book, I've skimmed through it before, but I tend to believe what these other people have to say.
Yeah.
We got 4 minutes left and one caller still on the line.
Okay, I'm sorry. And one last thing, where can I get one of those badass coffee cups?
Do we still sell them?
I don't know if we do.
We can't talk about selling them, though.
We have an email address, tv@atheist-community.org. Okay. For anyone who's watching, if you got any questions, comments, or anything like that, if you don't get a chance to get on the air, go ahead and write us at that address, and we can reply to you. If you have any questions about the show, then we can get details over that.
And real quick, I'd like to recommend something which you can find on the web. It's written by Bertrand Russell, and it's called The Problems of Philosophy, and it tackles knotty questions like, is there a difference between stuff we know and stuff that actually exists?
Okay.
It's really long, but if you're interested, then that might be a good thing to read.
All right. Russell, Ashley, thanks, guys.
Okay.
See ya.
Thanks a lot for calling. All right. As said, we got about 3 minutes left in the show. As I said, tv@atheist-community.org if you want to write us an email. First, what we're going to do in the last couple of minutes, go to Martin. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Okay. What you got for us?
I recently converted to atheism about a year ago, and I was brought up in a long line of Mormon families, and that's quite a change in a religion or lack thereof.
I'll bet.
So I was wondering how y'all changed, like what kind of family background y'all have to change to atheism.
Okay. I was actually raised Catholic. I went to church every week with my dad through, I think it was 11th grade or so. And basically I've always had doubts and questions. And basically it was just 11th grade that I said, look, I've had enough of this. I don't believe any of it. I just don't see any evidence. And so I stopped going to church. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I actually got down and really looked at things and, looked over my beliefs and said, nah, it's a lot of wishful thinking and such.
I'm a fourth-generation atheist. My dad was an atheist, his dad was an atheist, his dad was an atheist, and my son, who is 2, I expect and hope that he'll be an atheist.
Yeah, that's kind of how I changed. I went to church pretty much every Sunday, and with my dad and whole family and grandparents, and I had a lot of doubts and couldn't see the light, as they called,
Yeah.
And it was just hard for me. Kind of grew apart. My family shunned me out, and it was just a tough transition.
Yeah.
Kind of hard.
Yeah, some families can be very much into that. Luckily, on my side, my dad was a religious one. He brought me to church. My mom was pretty light on it. She had some vague ideas about God, but nothing really specific. So it was, one night of tension, and that was kind of the end of it. Just, well, I think you could be doing better, but okay.
Yeah, well, the bottom line is atheists come from everywhere, just like Christians do.
Exactly.
So you should come down to Beignets sometime.
Yep. We're going to go ahead and let you go. We just got a couple of seconds left, but thanks a lot for calling in.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
That's every Sunday morning at, 10:30?
Every Sunday morning at 11:30.
11:30.
Crescent City Beignets. It's on 6th Street, a couple blocks west of Lamar. Again, any atheist-friendly people,
check
you're
our website.
more than welcome. Please come down and check us out. Website, atheist-community.org, and our email address, if you have any questions or something that you think of during the week for us, tv@atheist-community.org. Thanks everybody for watching. Thank you very much, Russell, for coming on and helping us out.
Thanks for having me, and bye.
See ya.